if that's okay. And thank you so much for having me. It's just so lovely being here. So if you just bear with me a moment and I'll share the materials I have, and then you're welcome to share them with the audience as well.
Yes, please.
There we go. So thanks so much for having me. I am Dr. Paula Villegas and I work at the University of St. Andrews, and I'm going to be telling you a little bit about technology and how we can
Uh,
add it into our sessions. Okay, so I have a few kind of aims for today's talk.
uh,
I want us to start think. Sorry.
excuse me, ma'am. Sorry to cut you short. If you could just please check your mic because on my side the your voice is not very much clear. Though you
All
are
right.
audible, but if
Yeah, I am with the microphone. Is this, can you hear me a bit better now?
okay, yes,
Yeah?
it seems better.
Oh,
So I
lovely.
just would like to introduce you first, and
Sure.
then we'll formally begin. Thank you so much. Welcome to the TechHighEd Webinar series, and today we are gathered for the webinar on pedagogy before technology, where we'll explore effective ways to incorporate technology in our sessions. And our honorable speaker is Dr. Paula Villegas. She's an associate lecturer at the University of St. Andrews and director of the Academic English Service. There, she leads a dedicated team supporting students' academic and language development. Previously, she worked at the University of Sheffield, collaborating closely with academic departments on English for academic purposes and academic literacies. Professor Paula holds an doctorate in education that focused on flipped learning in the online environment, and her research explores innovative pedagogies and navigating higher education. In 2024, she joined the editorial board of Journal of Learning Development in Higher Education and is recognized as a senior fellow of advanced higher education. Uh, Thank you so much, Professor Paula, for joining us today and for sparing your time. Over to you, please.
Thank you for such a lovely introduction, and thanks again for having me here. So, we are going to be thinking about pedagogy before technology and how we can think about it to use it in our sessions effectively. So I have a few aims or goals for today's talk. So we're going to cast our mind back to the way technology has been used in language learning. We're going to think a little bit about how we are understanding technology and learning theories in the digital age. Um, we're also going to think a little bit about the nature of pedagogy and how it relates to technology and the kind of things that we can do in our sessions. And then I will suggest some takeaway ideas that you can start using in your sessions to start introducing technology in the language classroom. As I go along, feel free to ask any questions using the chat, and I love to hear about your experiences as well. So, just to get us a bit started, I wanted us to think about what do we think about when we talk about technology in the classroom. And if you have a look at the first picture, we have some tools there, like traditional ones, like we've grown up with when we were learning our second and third languages, you know, the chalk and the blackboard. And we also have in the second picture different tools that are a bit more related to technology. So we have the smart boards, a completely different way in which we are organizing our learners. We've moved from, you know, roles and individual work to a much more collaborative approach where we are already introducing technology to help our learners develop. So it's quite interesting to see and to think about how the technology in the classroom is evolving and changing as we go along. All these things like the smart boards, the learners coming with their smartphones, they allow us to do so many collaborative things and open up the space to many different possibilities. The challenge for us as language teachers is how do we make the most of those possibilities and move away from a tokenistic integration of technology where we have some flashy games or some flashy software, but not a lot of learning is actually happening. So what are we thinking about when we're thinking about technology, and what are we thinking about when we're thinking about using it? And traditionally, we've had these two almost opposite approaches and ways of thinking about technology. We had a pedagogy-led position and a technology-led position. And as it tends to happen with dichotomies, they hardly ever spoke to each other. So when we're thinking about a pedagogy-led position, we're thinking about the pedagogy is informing the choices. And when we're thinking about a technology led position, the technology itself or the software itself informs our choices as teachers. So when we are being led by technology, the first question that we ask as practitioners is how can we use this tech in the classroom? So maybe we go to one of those introductory talks where they sell us some fancy software, or we encounter an educational platform that might be beneficial for our learners and we like the look of it, and you might like what it can or cannot do. So that is kind of like your primary motivation to include this in the classroom. With a pedagogy-led position, as I was saying before, we're looking at how can the technology help me achieve my intended learning outcomes? How can it allow me to implement my teaching activities? How can I use technology to ensure that my learners can read a text in English or can communicate in English or whichever language you're teaching? So when we're coming at the introduction of technology from a technology-led position, we we are basically falling into different practices that may not be the best to foster learning. So, yes, they can be fun and they can be a little game, but are we developing those skills that we actually want to develop? Um, it also has, from a philosophical perspective, quite a deterministic approach. We are presenting language as, you know, that one thing that never changes and that learners can mechanically engage with. But as we know, language is a lot more than that. It's part of that socio-cultural learning and that process. When we're learning English as a foreign language, we're not just learning the grammar and the pronunciation. We are learning pragmatics. We are learning that we need to say no thank you when someone offers something to us rather than no. So it's about thinking about how we can bring all of that as well. When we have a technology led position, we might be falling into using powerful organizations like, Pearson or ClassDojo or Google. And these powerful organizations may not have the best interests of us in their heart or their students. They might be seeing our learners as data. So we need to think about all these things when we are inviting technology into our sessions. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't. I love technology and I think it makes learning a much more engaging and unique experience for everyone. However, there's a better way of introducing technology in our sessions. And I'm going to go back to this idea of constructive alignment and how it can help us meaningfully implement technology. So, from our perspectives as teachers, we think about our objectives, what we want to do, and that informs our intended learning outcomes, right? What is it that we want to teach our learners? Present simple and how to use it in an affirmative sentence, interrogative sentence, and negative sentence. Now, I have my learning outcomes, right? The next step is all about the teaching activities. What kind of activities are there available to me to help me meet those intended learning outcomes? Maybe a fill in the gaps where learners can complete the sentences, maybe true or false sentences where learners can see if there is a mistake and they can get the feedback straight away because that is the magic of technology. And then we can think about how we are assessing that. How do I make sure that my learners have learned what I wanted them to learn? Um, what constructive alignment looks like from a student perspective is a little bit different. And I'm sure this is something that you can all relate to. Our learners are obsessed with assessments. They just want to know how we're going to check that they've learned what we want them to learn, right? So for them, this idea of the assessment almost comes first, and then they work their way back thinking about the activities and the outcomes. So it's quite interesting how we as teachers are thinking about what do I want them to learn, and our learners are thinking, how am I going to be assessed? And these two perspectives exist in the classroom. When we bring technology in, you may have that initial, is this going to help me in the exam? Kind of barrier that you have to overcome. And one way of overcoming that barrier and showing the learners how technology indeed helps them learn and do a lot better in their assessments is by showing them how everything fits together. It's also a little bit more engaging and a little bit more fun. So that might also help create that buy-in where you're bringing your learners into almost an adventure with you when you're opening up the space for technology. Um, I don't know if you've come across this sort of recent paper um, but Fawn in 2023 published this paper that thinks a little bit more about it's not about the technology first or it's not about the pedagogy first, it's about an in between. And it conceptualizes the use of technology as a way to inspire us to rethink our learning outcomes and to rethink our activities. And it's this idea of an entangled pedagogy where we are almost working with technology from the design stage. And this is what I would like to invite you to consider when you're using technology in your own sessions. Not only think about your ultimate goals, which are essential, and not only think about the flashy technology, but how can both of them work for you and your learners, okay? And it's this idea of you are recovering that agency and you are designing the use of technology in a way that is meaningful and effective. if all of this is sounding super theoretical, bear with me, it does get more practical as we go along. I'm sure that you are familiar with these learning theories, but just for fun, if you want to tell us in the chat, how confident do you feel about these learning theories? That will be quite fun. But these are the most common learning theories that we are using in teaching English, and also that we are using when we are thinking about integrating technology in our sessions. So for a little bit of a recap, with a traditional behaviorist approach, we are looking at reinforcement, positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, and to a certain extent, a punishment of behaviors. So if you think about the typical true or false online type of question, your learners will get the green tick that they all love to see when they get it right, and they will get the red cross when it's wrong. Okay. As you are aware, the main critique with this behaviorist approach is that it's quite simplistic and it's quite instructor led. Either us as teacher or our technological artifacts are telling our learners what is right and what is wrong. The wonderful thing about behaviorism when we are creating our online activities is that we can provide clear feedback. So if we are doing an online true or false, an online fill in the gaps, there is one answer. We can reward our learners for the correct answer, and we can automatically show our learners what was right, and if it wasn't right, what they needed to have done in order to make it right, which is a very valuable piece of information, and it is helping the learner understand, oh, okay, if I'm using a sentence in the present simple and the subject is the third person, I mustn't forget the little s at the end. So it's about building those practices and providing that clear feedback, which is also completely individualized, isn't it? Because in a traditional classroom, if we are doing a fill in the gaps on a piece of paper, we have to do all the marking, or we have to get them, put the answers on the board and they have to correct each other. Whereas with the online version, they get the answer straight away, it's personal and it's specific to their learning needs and specifically to what they know and what they need to know. Um, from a more constructivist approach or cognitive constructivism as well, we're basically looking at this idea of remembering, thinking, reflecting, and doing something with that information. So we're moving away from understanding language as a mechanical process and starting to think about it as a way of conceptualizing our ideas and relate with the community. Okay. Um, the problem with constructivism to a certain extent is that it brings this idea of motivation and the affective domain and the affective filter. I don't think this is necessarily a problem. I think we need to remember that our learners are people and they will have good days and bad days and days when they are so excited to be in the classroom and chat away in English with us, and days when maybe they don't feel like being so communicative as we are always trying to do in our sessions, like, oh, you have to use English and talk to each other. So that's something that we need to keep in mind as well. In practical terms, when we are creating our online activities, thinking about it from a constructivist and cognitive approach can help us make sure that we are not overloading our learners. So being aware of the cognitive load and the memory load can help us distribute the content online in a way that is accessible for our learners and within their zone of proximal development. So this is just a fancy way of saying don't throw a lot of information to your learners online because they will get lost. It'll be too much. So just make sure that you break those ideas into smaller, more manageable bits and that you increase in difficulty as you go along. So all these principles that we are using to inform our classroom need to inform our development of online materials. Um, when we're thinking about constructivism from a social perspective, then we are thinking about learning as that part of a community and a sense of belonging. And again, this idea of, you know, the gap between what the learner knows and what the learner needs to know. In terms of critiquing this part of constructivism, um, as language teachers, we tend to do diagnostic tests, and again, with the spirit of understanding that our learners are people and putting them at the center, we tend to ask about their needs. And some learners are fantastic at articulating what they need. However, your learners don't know what they don't know. So if we are only relying on their perceptions of what they need to interact with the community, to communicate with each other, we might be missing important information here. So it's about finding that balance between you know what they need and addressing their perceived needs as well, and finding that sweet spot where you can foster their intrinsic motivation and they'll be a lot happier to engage with your materials and your sessions, but also you are making sure that you feel those intended learning outcomes and you get your learners what you want them to be. So the implications for us when we are developing our technology artifacts and our technology online activities is think about how you can encourage independent learning and collaboration. So this can be as simple as using collaborative documents to do reading circles or writing circles where the learners have a specific role, but they're all putting it together in that one document that you can then check and provide feedback. So it's like everyone has their job and they work together to build something. Okay. As well, thinking about that future development and where you're taking them with your activities. Um, Other aspects that we need to consider, and I'm sure you've encountered this theory before, it's connectivism, and it's supposed to be the first pedagogical theory that has technology as at its core, really, and it's all about connecting knowledge. So we're no longer expecting our learners to remember everything, but rather know where to find the information. Um, so the key here is that we are building on what the learner knows. The problem for us as teachers is that every single learner will come from a different starting point. As well, in order to allow learners to be independent and do, these little online projects where we send them away to find sources, they need critical skills. They need to be able to distinguish what's a reliable source and what is not a reliable source. So for us, the implication here when we are developing our online materials is that as much as possible, we need to integrate their previous experiences in the learning space without overlooking the fact that they need training to be able to just navigate the world, and also that they are all coming from different starting points. And I think as language teachers, this is something that we all see all the time, that all our learners have different levels to engage with us and to communicate as well. Some of the newest theories is the transformative learning theory, and it's this idea that learning is change. The problem is that not all learning is actually change. It is development for sure, but it doesn't necessarily involve a core change. So in terms of how we can bring the best of this theory when we are designing our online materials, all these activities that highlight noticeable differences are informed by transformative learning theory and can work really well. So, for example, if you have a little text that is written in colloquial English, and then a version that is more academic, you can get them to find those differences and reflect on the linguistic discourse. Okay. Again, we are encouraging that self-directed learning and fostering that individual ability to engage with the online materials, which is something that we can do because it's online. When we have large English language classrooms, it's very difficult to make sure that every activity is pitched to the right level for that person. But with online materials, we can differentiate a little bit better. We can be like, oh, you got this one right, so you can skip this unit, or you didn't get this one right, you need to go back and revise that content. So it can make our life a lot easier and the learner experience a lot more personal as well. Of course, we got this idea of the social learning theory, and is we are thinking about learning as a result of an interaction. Okay, this is lovely. I absolutely try all these groups and pairs and getting learners to work together and use the language in a meaningful way. However, as we've mentioned before, some learners are reticent to engage. They just don't, their affective filter is up the roof. They don't feel like they want to have a chat, and that makes things a little bit harder for us in the language classroom. Um, so thinking about strategies to foster that learner-to-learner interaction by giving them clear tasks and a clear topic to discuss, and even group assessment. When we are using group assessment, I think it's wise to grade the learners individually rather than giving them a group grade because it helps soften any frictions or problems. Okay, so far we've done a brief holistic overview of key learning theories and what they mean for us in the online environment. And I want to introduce or revise the Puente Duras model to give us a little bit of a starting point when we are bringing technology into our classroom. So there are different levels in which technology can change our classroom space. We can have a direct substitution. So basically here, rather than having a fill in the gaps on a piece of paper, you have a fill in the gaps on H5P. And it's just a direct substitute. Does not change in the ILOs, does not change in the techniques, does not change in procedures. It's just instead of being in paper or on a piece of paper, you have it on the computer. That's all there is. Now, in the case of augmentation, technology is a direct substitute with functional improvement. So in my example of an online fill in the gaps, augmentation allows us to give personalized an immediate feedback to the learner. So when they do it on a piece of paper, we need to take it back and mark it, or we need to do a class feedback session. Whereas with augmentation, they fill in the gaps and they get the result straight away. Now, with modification, technology allows us for a significant task redesign. So we're moving away from a mechanical behaviorist, you fill in the gap with the correct word, and we are opening up the space for transformation. So maybe we have the learners using that vocabulary or linguistic strategies and structures that we want them to use, but rather than having a prescriptive fill in the gaps, they write using those stories in those structures in collaboration. So they might write, a story about their habits, or if we are teaching them the past simple, a story about what they did yesterday. And they are working together and they're all typing together because we are using a collaborative document where everyone can chip in and add their ideas. The final stage is this idea of redefinition. So because of technology, we can do something that we couldn't do before, right? And this is where multimodality and different outputs can come in together. So with technology, we can get our learners to actually do a little video where they use the language and they are maybe recording what they do in a day and having a little bit of a voiceover, and we are able to then assess not just the linguistic structures and vocabulary, but also their pronunciation in a way that we couldn't before. So this is just hopefully a nice example to walk you through the levels, and we will go back to this model, and I would like to encourage you to think about this model when you are transforming your sessions and looking into how you're using technology and how you are maximizing technology. Um, in terms of challenges, and there are so many, there are quite a few that we need to consider. First of all is inequality. Depending on your context, our learners may have different ways of engaging, accessing, and navigating technology. So I work in St. Andrews. All my learners in St. Andrews bring their laptop. So it's very easy for me to have stuff online. I can see what they're writing in real time. It is just very accessible. However, I volunteer with the council as an ESOL teacher, and my ESOL learners don't come to class with a laptop. I can't rely on them accessing the internet or online materials in the session because they just don't have the laptops or even a smartphone to be able to access that. So we need to make sure that when we are bringing technology, we can either provide the hardware and software, or we know our learners have access to that hardware and software, or we need to rethink what we are doing with technology. There are different conceptualizations and understanding of technology and different levels of comfort with technology. So if you are teaching as part of a course and as part of a group, some of you might be really confident and really happy to just, get a collaborative writing going on or using a little Padlet. And there might be colleagues who are quite reticent to engage with technology. They might be concerned about other things. They're just not really able to think about what is the best way to bring technology. So that's something that we need to consider as well. We need to be quite critical, just as we expect our learners to be critical of the information they come across. We need to be quite careful with commercial interests. Educational industries move a lot of money, and companies like Pearson, Google, they do make a lot of money out of teachers using their products in the classroom. So there can be a little bit of publication bias. You know, we only get to see the success stories of bringing technology in the classroom. We hardly ever hear about the challenges. So that's something to consider as well. When we're looking at practitioners' articles, and I think those are probably my favorite when we're thinking about the challenges of technology and how to bring it into the sessions, is that, you know, when we are evaluating our own work and we are writing all these lovely practitioners' articles, there might be a certain aspect of confirmation bias. You know, if you love technology, you might be amplifying the benefits that you experience in the session. So looking at triangulation when we're looking at these practitioners articles is very, very helpful to help us conceptualize it a bit better. There are concerns about data privacy and what they are doing with our data and our learners' data. And you know, we need to be critical about the limitations of technology. And if we don't have a clear goal in our sessions, if we don't know about our theory, if we don't know what we're doing with it, technology is not going to make us better teachers, and it's not going to help us help our learners get where they need to be. So this is kind of important. And again, technology changes so quickly. It's a little bit tricky to keep up. So thinking about the competence in the software and the competence on the pedagogical underpinnings can help us navigate these challenges as well. Okay. Now, this is not to say that you shouldn't use technology. You should. It's great. We just need to think about all these potential issues that can arise. So what I'm going to do in this part of the talk is I'm going to show you a few practical examples of what this looks like in the classroom. And then for the final part, I'll move on into specific software and platforms that you can use to try these things with your own learners. So I'm going to talk a little bit about technology enhanced learning in language education, and I'm going to use EAP as an example. So EAP, as you know, is English for academic purposes, and the reason why I've chosen EAP is because by its very nature, EAP puts the students at the center of provision. So it's all about what the learner needs. And I think this is a very nice approach when we are teaching languages, thinking about our learners. Why do they need to learn English and how can we help them achieve those goals? With EAP, we are seeing the learners as in training researchers. So we're not only teaching them the language, we are teaching them the language of the academic community. So they need to be able to interact and contribute to building knowledge. And when you think about yourself as a teacher and how we conceptualize our performance in the classroom, we are going back again into a bit of a dichotomy. So we have this idea of the sage on the stage. It's this charismatic lecturer that is giving all the information and it's all about them and they are at the center and blah, blah, blah. And then completely on the other side, we have this idea of the guide on the side, which is this lecturer or this teacher who's facilitating and getting the learners to talk to each other and getting the learners to generate knowledge. And the teacher is there almost to guide them in the right direction. The challenge with the sage on the stage approach is that it becomes all about the teacher. It's very teacher centered. We know in the language classroom, we need to get our learners to communicate. They have to use the language. They need to do something with it, and they can't if we are just talking nonstop. On the other side, if we are just facilitating and promoting discussion, the knowledge can become invisible, and learners may live with that sense of, okay, I had a chat with my mates, but what did I actually learn? So for us, it's about finding that sweet spot in the middle, this idea of the mirror in the middle, where we are transitioning seamlessly from presenting ideas to allowing the learners to use those ideas. For us specifically, we're talking about linguistic structures, phonemes, ways of communicating, and then opening up the space for them to practice. Okay, so we're basically looking at a classic PPP, presentation, practice, production. That's the kind of dynamic that we're having in mind. So, thanks to COVID, technology has become even more popular and more prominent in education. I think we were doing really well in terms of bringing technology into the classroom and opening up the space to new advancements. However, with emergency remote teaching, everyone moving online, things have skyrocketed. So we are in a very exciting pedagogical time where we are looking back at the kind of things and the kind of teaching that happen within emergency remote teaching years in our current landscape. And we're thinking, okay, which things did I do that work really well and that I can bring into my current context? Um, and our current context can be so different and varied. We might be teaching fully online with learners in our country or learners in different countries. We might be looking at blended or hybrid courses where there is a strong element of online learning, and then a little bit of face-to-face or synchronous learning, or we might be back into full face-to-face. So our reality has changed in the classroom, and this change in reality has facilitated changes in pedagogy. And one of the key changes that technology has facilitated is flip learning. So flip learning was around before online, before emergency remote teaching, and you know, Berman and Sons, who are credited with conceptualizing flip learning as we understand it now, tend to say that flip learning became popular thanks to the use of technology because it allows the teacher to create these low order thinking skill tasks that learners can engage with before the session in a way that is active learning and accessible to the learners. I think it's a little bit more complicated than just technology. The key point of flip learning is that we are flipping Bloom's taxonomy. So we are opening up the classroom space for applying the language, analyzing these linguistic structures, evaluating, creating our own stories, opening up the space for learners to use the language in a meaningful way. And in order to do that, we have provided the learners with the key structures beforehand. Um, Obviously, this is a bit of a gamble because if the learners don't engage with the materials before the session falls completely. So it is a risky approach. So the way we are conceptualizing flip learning here is almost as a blended approach. Our learners are, as I said, engaging with the low order thinking skill tasks before the session, and we are making this possible by acknowledging the individuality and different learning stages of our learners, which is something quite challenging to do in a physical classroom when we have 40 students or 20 students and they all are at different levels. However, through the online learning, we can provide that differentiation, this ability to access different tasks at their level, which is a dream for language teachers because we can potentially have a level playing field where all the learners have been exposed to the structures that we are wanting them to use, which is almost a miracle when it happens. And it's this idea that the online space allows us to make sure that the learners are completing the tasks because we can monitor and see what they're doing and what they're not doing. Having enough space for differentiation, either led by the program itself, if you don't get all of these right, you have to do it again, or led by the learners, or led by you. You can have in the instructions, okay, if you got a 14 here, you need to move to task 3. If you got a 7, you need to go back to task 1. So it's about building up almost an ecosystem of learning that allows your students to fully participate in the sessions, making them communicative. And it also opens up the space for questions. The learners have had time to process these structures, to be exposed to this new vocabulary, and they might come up with questions that you can then answer as part of a little learning community. So it is really quite exciting. Um, in terms of what flipped learning in the EAP classroom can look like, you got a little example here. So if we start at the beginning, we have low order thinking skill task. So we have, remember, something that you have or that we have explored with the learners in the session already. Now, because the learners are supposed to be working on this individually, I need to make sure that my instructions are very clear because I'm not there to be like, oh, you're not doing that right. So as you can see, you have that clarity there of you need to match this and you need to match that. Um, and that's just absolutely brilliant. And then, what you have here is this idea of a procedural engagement, and it ties really well to this comment in the chat, where we're thinking about providing interactive and personalized learning experiences. And it connects to this idea of inequalities. Not all our learners will know that they'll have to click on the thing and match it together. So this is why it's quite important to think about the pedagogy and also the procedural stages and the exposure that our learners have. So I think that's a very insightful comment. So thank you for that. That's lovely. Um, I have another little example here of what these can look like in real life. So because the learners are working on this on their own, they can feel a bit far away from you. So try to bring yourself into the material. So we are fostering that personal engagement. So as you know, according to self-determination theory, which I love because it's simple and it gives us that little framework to think about our activities where we have competence, autonomy, and relatedness. And it's almost a checklist for us when we are developing our technological artifacts. So, does my learner know why they're doing this? Is my learner able to do this? And is my learner feeling part of that community, a part of the class, not feeling far away from me with that distance that the computer is putting between us? So using photos and friendly language can really help with that sense of relatedness. If you don't want to use your photos, you can always have a memoji, that create that little cartoon that looks like you, and it almost makes that relationship a little bit more personal. Um, so that's kind of like something that we can consider as well. And then I've mentioned this idea of differentiation, and I am putting the responsibility on the learner here. I'm saying to them, okay, so if you've done the task and you feel confident, you're ready to move on. If you're not feeling confident, you need to go back and revise these ideas. So this is what one way of making it look like that. When we are designing our online materials, we need to think about multimodality. And I'll just give you a minute to read through that and also a break from my voice. So this idea of multimodality is perfect for the online environment because we can have text, audio, videos, pictures, procedural engagement where we're clicking on things and highlighting things. However, it can all be too much of a good thing. As we know, our brains process the information differently. So if I put this chunk of text on a slide and I talk at you at the same time, your brain can either listen to me or read the text, but it can't do both things at the same time. And this is because our brains process the information through separate channels and they can't do it at the same time. So think about your learner's brain and how they are processing that information. Is it accessible? Are we using colors that um, are okay for our learners to engage with? Are we using strategies that show how the content is organized? Are we having a nice variety of audio, video, text that it speaks to the different senses and the different ways in which we engage with information while not being overwhelming for the learner? Um, so in here, um, this is what it can look like in terms of accessibility and that sort of multimodal engagement. So we have a traditional slide here, and then we have the little bit that the learner, if they're using a screen reader, can access to. And then when we're looking at concept checking questions to invite them to engage and produce something as well. So there's a lovely question here about technology-led pedagogy and learning theories. I think behaviorism is probably the key one in forming a technology-led pedagogy because we're looking at, very basic, this is right, this is wrong, positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. I'm not saying that behaviorism doesn't have a space when we're building sort of like online stuff. I think for the low order thinking skill task, behaviorism is fab, but maybe we need to think a little bit beyond that. And that's kind of the idea of forefronting our pedagogies rather than the fancy software that is available to us. And that leads very, very nicely to the fancy software that is available to us. So just to finish the talk, I'm going to talk through some free and some behind paywalls kind of activities or software that you can use in your own sessions. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. They do rely on behaviorism. I'm not a fan of behaviorism, but I do think it has its own space. So what you have on the slide here is Edpuzzle. Now, Edpuzzle is free, which is my favorite type of software. I'm not going to lie. And what Edpuzzle allows you to do is you can upload or you can find online videos, and it allows you to edit them, add questions like, again, in the spirit of behaviorism, true or false, multiple choice, and you can also have open questions. So I will be putting the links as we go along. Um, Things that are lovely about Edpuzzle is that, apart from the fact that it's free, um, you can find so many educational videos that are exciting. There's a lot of content there that's been generated already, so you might be able to tweak what fits your needs. If you are teaching learners where YouTube is not accessible, Edpuzzle puts like a protection thing on the video and it makes it accessible. So it's one way of overcoming that barrier. So because Edpuzzle is educational, it's not actually behind walls. Yeah, I love a bit of Edpuzzle. It's just so good. And it gives you the reports as well. So you can see who watched it, for how long, the activities that they got right and the ones that they got wrong. So it's just really, really lovely. Another type of authoring tool is H5P. So H5P has a free version that works really, really well, and it allows you to create true or false questions, multiple choice, but also more sophisticated stuff. And among the most sophisticated stuff that you can create is what you've got there in the slide, which is you can get learners to read a complex text and write little notes that you can then share with the rest of the class, almost like perusal. I don't know if you encountered that one before, but perusal is quite nice as well for this idea of collaborative reading. But I think that one is behind a paywall. But it's also worth exploring. Is perusal. I'll put it in the chat as well. Um, H5P also allows learners the possibility of writing essays, and you can, to a certain extent, streamline the correction process. So you can generate a module, kind of like a model response, and then your students can compare it with what they've written. So you can use demand high to get them to look at their answer, look at the model answer, and identify the bits that are similar, the bits that are different, and whether they should be improved in different ways or not. Another classic in the online material development is Padlet, which we will actually be using in the session today. So Padlet is fab for collaboration. I'll show you what it looks like. It's free for up to 3 boards, but you can keep deleting them and redoing them. So that's fine. And it's very, very easy to use. So I think with Edpuzzle and H5P, there's a little bit of a learning curve. So you need to spend a little bit of time playing about with the software to get it to do what you want. But with Padlet, it's so easy. It's this idea of having a collaborative notice board. And in the example that I have in the slides, so this is something that I've done with my babies. They're all 16, 17, and they're about to get into university. So they need to be able to develop these academic skills, right? And one of the things that they um, struggle with is reading articles. So I get them to, give them different roles, as in academic reading circles, and then they get to write their little responses, and I can see what they're writing, so can everyone, and it makes then the discussion a lot more focused to their needs and collaborative. So there's a lovely question here about the great learners to work with these tools. So You can potentially use these with any ages, okay? However, because it's online, I would probably wait until they're 8, 9 years old and they have a little bit of computer literacy, as someone pointed out in the chat before, so that you know you're not spending your time teaching them how to use a computer, but rather they already know how to do that. Um, the beauty of these tools is that you create your own activities. So they can be simple or complex. Sorry, I think there's someone who's like unmuted and there's a little bit of noise coming up. Um, but yeah, basically, if you can, because you can create what you're doing, you can make it as complicated or as accessible as you want. Some of the things that are quite nice with H5P as well is that you can have a graph or a picture with hotspots. So the learners can click on it and learn about different graphs and processes. So it can be quite handy, it can be quite helpful. Um, so I have mentioned H5P. The other one that is similar to H5P is RISE, Articulate 360. So I'm a big fan of RISE. I think it's really lovely. However, it's really expensive. So you can have a play with it for free for a month, but then after a month, it's quite dear. So look at institutional accounts and what the institutions can do for you, and whether they, you know, the technology department may have access to it. A lot of unis are getting into Canva, which offers something similar. Again, Moodle, Blackboard, sort of traditional VLEs. So spend a little bit of time exploring what's accessible to you through your institution, because these things can be quite dear. Um, and these are all the ones that sort of wanted to go through with you. I have a little bit of a Padlet, and I just wanted to invite you to think about, you know, the model and how it can help you develop different strategies for your own classes and different pedagogies and different ways of structuring the information, so you can share your ideas there. I will also put it in there, but I'm quite happy now to take any comments or questions that you may have or that you want to share. And thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Professor Vegas. So I think so I'm pronouncing your name correct. I tried to
You
look
are.
at it on the internet. So thanks to the technology, we get to have the pronunciation of names even. So that's something wonderful. Okay, so house is open to for the question answer sessions or the comments. You can unmute yourself and ask a question, please. Okay. Do you have
I
any
am.
question or a comment? I like the ideas that you have discussed, especially the tools. Some of them I have already been using, and I'll be exploring the others for my students, because I teach to the undergraduate and postgraduate students, and we explore technological tools for classroom practices. So these are some of the wonderful tools, like we have explored the tool at Puzzle, but and Padlet, but rest of them were new to me. So I'll first learn them myself, and then I'll try to explore them with my students. So that's wonderful. Thank you so much for such a nice session. And like you asked that about the summer model, yes, we do think about it, that where to substitute, where to augment, and how can we use it for transformative practices. uh, the use of technology is should be like, it is innovative, but I think so it's pedagogy that is more innovative. It's not the other way around. Technology is just a means, and we the teachers are basically taking hold of the classroom and taking control of everything, and then we decide what to initiate in the class. So you have very nicely put in all the ideas and the concepts, and I hope my participants must have gathered a lot from here. So if you have any comments or any things, please do write them in chat or ask.
Yeah, I mean, um, I completely agree. I think it can be quite challenging to find kind of like the right thing, first of all, because we have to spend a little bit of time understanding the technology ourselves. And also because it's all about the theory, isn't it? Like that can be quite challenging. I do have a few like suggestions for extra resources as well, things that you can play about with, and I'll put them in the chat. But they are probably better for young learners. So I don't know if a lot of your participants will be working with maybe kids. But yeah, I have a few suggestions. I'll put them in the chat. And these are more like games. Um, so I'm sure you've encountered Kahoot, but for example, Bamboozle or Educa Play, they're all free. And
Yes.
you can do all these little things like you're a little frog and you have to answer the questions to get them through. So it can be quite engaging for younger learners as well.
Yes. Okay, if we do not have any other questions, so I'll say you thank you so much for this wonderful session. We learned so many new things. Thank you so much. It
No,
was
thank you
wonderful
so much
talking
for
to
having
you.
me. Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care, everyone. Thanks again.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.